Chances are you've got gears on your bike, and lots of them. But the real question is, how do you use them? Well, in this video, I'm going to share a few tips for newer riders to explain just that. Avoiding this, and this, and this. But also share some tips for more experienced riders too, to get you shifting better than ever. Essentially, changing gears means that you can always find a balance between how fast your legs are spinning and how hard you have to press on the pedals. Legs moving too fast, shift into a higher gear. Feels too hard to press on the pedals, shift into a lower gear. Great, but how do we do that? Well, at this point, you want to have a look at your bike and figure out what gears you have. There are lots of different types, and knowing what you have will ultimately tell you how to use them. But let's stick with the basics. The gears at the back of the bike have a small difference between them. Each cog is a different gear, and you might have anywhere from 6 different cogs back here up to 13. The chain is moved by this thing here, called the derailleur. Next, what gears do you have at the pedals right here? So generally, most bikes have 2 chain rings or cogs at the front right here, and the differences between these 2 gears at the front is quite large. There's quite a big gap in how they both feel. So you'll normally have a smaller ring on the inside and a larger ring, much larger ring on the outside. Use that smaller inside ring for slower riding, usually going up a climb, riding slowly, potentially when you're not trying quite as hard, don't want to try quite as hard. That larger chain ring, that's used for faster riding on the flat, maybe on a downhill, or when you have a tailwind. You can then fine-tune your gears with these at the back. If you do only have 1 chain ring at the front by your pedals, don't worry at all, just one less thing to think about. Now, while we are here and you are looking at your bike, now is a really good time to figure out how you actually shift these gears. Generally, on a bike with drop handlebars, you find your gear levers up with your brakes, and they're designed in such a way that you can use them when either holding onto the brake hoods, these bits here, or on the drops, these bits here. Your right hand controls the fine-tuned gears at the back, and your left hand shifts between your climbing gears and your fast gears. Unfortunately, all brands of gears have slightly different ways of shifting, which isn't terribly helpful for an explainer video when I'm trying to speak quite generally about how to shift gears. But to be honest, they all work in a pretty similar fashion. One lever shifts into a harder gear, and the other lever shifts into an easier gear. The last basic but super important piece of information is to remember that you can only change gear when you're pedaling. The chain needs to be moving in order to move from one cog to the next. So if you're not pedaling, nothing will happen. We'll come back to this in a moment. A great idea is simply to try and find somewhere safe where you can practice your gear changes. Away from cars and busy roads, somewhere you don't have to concentrate too hard on riding so you can practice shifting. In fact, I can't recommend this enough. If you're pedaling, you can't damage your gears, so there's no need to be scared of doing anything wrong. Just press some levers to get familiar with what happens. I mentioned earlier that there is a big difference in feeling when you change gears at the front using your left-hand shifter. Now, when you do this, you might feel that you're under or over geared. And sometimes, especially when there's kind of a dramatic change in pace, maybe you're entering a climb or you're suddenly going on a quite fast section of road, you might need to change both at the front and the back at the same time. In these situations, be extra cautious. So you want to imply your gear change, but also at the same time, start to fine tune those gears at the back so you get into the right gear and you don't end up suddenly spinning your legs really fast and having to change it, or suddenly pedaling too slowly and it's hard to get on top of that gear. Remember I mentioned earlier about needing to pedal in order to change gear. Well, a really good tip actually is to look ahead down the road, look at the terrain you're about to cycle through and be mindful of it so that you can change gear before you potentially hit it. Even experienced cyclists sometimes get this wrong, and it's particularly common riding in traffic. You're riding along nicely and you have to stop at a road junction. When you get going again, you find that you're in too high a gear. When you try and shift, it all ends up in a very noisy mess. Whoa. Also, try to get into the habit of shifting into easier gears as you're slowing down, especially when you actually come to a stop at a junction, for example. That way, you're not stuck in a really big gear and you find it hard to get going again. This really applies to hills as well. You want to gradually shift into those easier gears. You don't get bogged down in that gear and you get into a situation where it's really hard to actually rectify the gear choice that you've gone for and get into something that's much more manageable. Oh. You'll find that if you do end up in a really hard gear, it can be quite hard to change in it. Now, that's because gears really don't like shifting under loads of pressure, even the really nice expensive ones. So instead of getting into a situation like this and hearing that nasty sound, what you want to do instead is relax on the pedals, release that pressure, and you'll find that your gears shift much smoother. So it's about that kind of momentary pause in pressure on the pedals, change the gear, be nice and smooth. And also, don't end up in a situation like that. You're stuck in a really hard gear and a nasty gradient. To know the number of gears you've got on your bike, you want to multiply the amount of gears at the front by the amount of gears at the back. So I've got 2 at the front multiplied by 12 at the back. So I've got 24 gears at my disposal. Well, kind of, because there are some gear combinations which you should try to avoid using. So the way my gears are set up now, I'm using the big chain ring at the front. I'm also using the big gear sprocket at the back. And the chain is at quite an acute angle. Now you want to try and avoid this because this is called cross chaining. And it's quite an inefficient way of riding. Now, most people tell you not to do it. It's not the end of the world. You can ride with it, but it is going to wear your chain a little bit quicker. And on most bikes, you will kind of hear that chain rubbing on the derailleur. So personally, I say to try and avoid it because especially when you're doing gear changes, in this scenario, you're going to increase your likelihood of shipping your chain, dropping your chain, which is something you definitely want to avoid. So you want to avoid this and try and just use the maximum, maybe the penultimate chainring at the back or even the one before that. Similarly, when this is the other way round, so when you have your little ring at the front and your little ring at the back, you want to avoid those extremes. Remember I mentioned earlier about needing to pedal in order to change gear. Well, a really good tip actually is to look ahead down the road, look at the terrain you're about to cycle through and be mindful of it so that you can change gear before you potentially hit it. It helps to plan this sort of change in advance, pre-selecting your gears while still at speed, pedaling gently whilst allowing the chain to move to where you sent it. You can then use those gears at the back to find your pace as the climb or gradient progresses. It's also really inefficient to be spinning super fast like this and not actually move up through your gears into harder gears and increase your speed. Plus, you're not going to cover as much ground when you could actually put down that effort. So do remember to change gears, shift up, and increase your speed. You might have to momentarily ride at a slower pace in terms of your leg speed for a while, but it's about using that strength to push up into the gear and finding that optimal rhythm which you're comfortable with, but also still allows you to travel relatively fast. Those faster, harder gears are also really useful when you want to get out of the saddle. So before I stand up on the pedals, I like to click up to 2 harder gears, slowing my leg speed, and it just gives you a bit more resistance when you do get up out of the saddle and push on the pedals, which is really important, not just for adapting your effort, but also for mixing up your position when you're on the bike to keep yourself comfortable over long periods of time in the saddle. There you go then, a few tips that I hope will get you shifting your gears better than potentially you did before you started watching this video. I do think that being able to efficiently use your gears and use them correctly is really key to being able to get the most out of your riding. So Please, I hope this video has helped you, and if it has, hit that thumbs up button. It really means the world to us. And let me know in the comment section down below where you're riding your bike. Where are you changing your gears? Always love to hear from you, and keep those comments coming in. Thanks, as always, for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.